Hello, we'll come back midnight history. You sit there, watching your wife being led away by the most powerful man on earth. You can't stand. You can't speak. Around you, 50 senators sit frozen in place, the rims of their wine cups trembling between their fingers. Some of them are quietly praying she will come back. But you're praying she won't say anything that could get both of you killed. 20 minutes pass like 20 years. When he finally returns, he doesn't simply bring her back to her seat. He pulls up a chair. He sits down. He pours himself wine. And then, right there in front of every man you must face again tomorrow, he begins to describe what happened behind that door. Detail by detail, cold, clinical, precise. Your colleagues stare down at their plates as if hiding inside them. Your wife stares into nothing. And you must smile. You must nod. You must thank him, because you know exactly what happens if you don't. You know the price isn't just your death, but the death of the children waiting for you at home. This wasn't madness. This was a machine. A system engineered with surgical precision to dismantle the human soul. And the man who built it learned every lesson while watching his own family be destroyed, one by the emperor who came before him. His name was Caligula. What he did to Rome is so disturbing, so methodically evil, that 2,000 years later, historians are still trying to understand how one human being could design psychological warfare at this level. If you believe that these darker chapters of human history deserve to be preserved and remembered, consider liking this video and subscribing. Your support helps uncover more stories from the deepest, most shadowed corners of our past. Now, let's return to our tale, because what you're about to hear is worse, far worse. And the most terrifying part isn't what Caligula did, but that the system he built survived long after he was gone. Before we step into the 5 acts of his machinery of terror, you need to understand something essential. Caligula was not born evil. He was made. He wasn't born into darkness. He was shaped by it, forged, engineered, and the process began when he was only 7 years old. Imagine this. The year is 14 AD. A small boy, no more than 6 or 7, runs between the tents of a Roman military camp. He's dressed in a tiny legionnaire's uniform, a miniature breastplate strapped to his chest, little red boots kicking up dust as he laughs. The soldiers, men who have carved half the known world into the borders of Rome, pause to watch him. Hardened veterans, scarred by a lifetime of war, suddenly soften. They lift him up, swing him through the air, call out his nickname with the warmth of fathers: Caligula, Little Boots. He is the son of Germanicus, Rome's brightest star, the greatest general the empire has celebrated since Julius Caesar. The legions worship the father, and they adore the son. To them, this child is a charm of victory, a small flame of hope. Where Germanicus goes, the boy follows. And everywhere the boy goes, the men swear the gods favor them. Caligula grows up believing he is safe, invincible, wrapped in the devotion of the strongest army on earth. But the warmth doesn't last. A year later, Germanicus is dead. The official story says illness. The whispers speak of poison, whispers that trace their way back towards someone close to the emperor. Perhaps the emperor himself. Caligula is only 8 when the machine begins its work. His mother is dragged away, accused of treason. His eldest brother is arrested, imprisoned, starved until he tries to eat the stuffing from his own mattress. Another brother is exiled to a distant island, beaten by guards until he shatters his own skull against the wall to make it stop. One by one, every branch of his family is snapped, and the boy watches it all. By 19, he is the only one left, the final survivor of a bloodline that once stood at the heart of Rome. Then comes the summons. Emperor Tiberius wants him. Capri, an island of sunlight and cliffs, has become Tiberius's private fortress, a place far from Rome, far from the Senate, far from anyone who might question what happens inside its walls. And young Caligula is ordered to enter it. Far from Rome, far from the Senate, far from anyone who might dare object to the things he does there. The ancient historians, Suetonius, Tacitus, men writing within living memory of these events, describe Capri not as a retreat, but as a house of horrors. A place where Emperor Tiberius, once a disciplined commander, had rotted into something paranoid and depraved. Surrounded by astrologers, flatterers, and men who feared silence more than lies, he spent his days inventing new cruelties simply because boredom had become unbearable. And into this world walks a teenage Caligula. He knows the truth. He knows Tiberius murdered his family. Everyone knows it, but he cannot show it. He cannot let a single flicker of grief, a single tightening of the jaw, cross his face. One wrong look, one breath taken at the wrong moment, and he will join the rest of his bloodline. So he does the only thing that keeps him alive. He becomes exactly what Tiberius wants: obedient, entertaining, harmless, a living ornament in a palace of fear. Suetonius writes a line that chills the spine even now. There never was a better servant, nor a worse master. Caligula learns to bury everything human inside himself. He watches, he memorizes, he studies the way Tiberius breaks people, not with swords, but with dread, humiliation, and silence. For 6 long years, he plays this role to perfection, and then in 37 AD, Tiberius dies. Some say from illness. Others whisper that Caligula pressed a pillow over the old man's face. Either way, the 19-year-old prisoner walks out of Capri not as a hostage, but as the most powerful human being on earth. Rome erupts in celebration. They believe they are welcoming the son of beloved Germanicus, the bright, hopeful heir. They have no idea. They have just handed the empire to someone who spent 6 years learning how to dismantle the human soul from the greatest monster Rome had ever produced. For 7 months, everything seems perfect. A golden age reborn, smiles in the streets, prayers of gratitude in the temples. And then he falls ill, and the man who wakes up is not the same one who went to sleep. And the person who rises from that sickbed is not the same man who lay down in it. What happened during those fevered days? We'll never know. No historian, no physician, no rumor has ever explained it fully. But when Caligula opened his eyes again, something in him had cracked, cleanly, quietly, beyond repair. And Rome was about to discover what he'd been hiding beneath the mask he wore on Capri. Because what follows isn't chaos. It isn't the outburst of a madman. It is design. Caligula did not rule by impulse. He built a structure, a 5-part machine of psychological warfare, each act crafted to crush a different part of the human spirit. And the most terrifying part is how cold, how deliberate, how methodical it all was. Let me show you the blueprint. Turn. Act I, the sister goddess. Caligula had 3 sisters, but one, Drusilla, was different. Ancient writers whispered that their relationship crossed lines Rome rarely dared to speak of. Truth or slander, it almost doesn't matter. What matters is that everyone believed it, and Caligula did nothing to stop those rumors. In fact, he fed them. Then Drusilla died, and what Caligula did next reveals the core logic of his machine. He takes private pain and forces an entire empire to feel it with him. He does not mourn. He weaponizes Horrifying mourning. First, he orders the Senate to declare Drusilla a goddess. Not in poetry, not in metaphor, but in Roman law. Temples rise in her name. Altars are built. Citizens must worship her by decree. Then he announces a period of mourning throughout the empire. And here the cruelty reveals itself. It becomes a capital crime to laugh. One wrong smile, one involuntary breath of joy, and the punishment is execution. It is now a capital crime to bathe. It is now a capital crime to sit and eat dinner with your family. Read that again. For weeks, perhaps months, Rome lives under this law. If you're seen smiling, you can be executed. Imagine waking up in that world. Your child tells a small joke over breakfast. Do you laugh with them the way any parent would? Or do you silence them, teach them fear, teach them caution, teach them that joy itself has become dangerous? Every warm moment, every soft memory, every spark of happiness is now a potential death sentence. Caligula isn't mourning. He's making an entire empire drown inside his grief. He's discovering that he can legislate emotion, criminalize joy, turn his inner world into the reality everyone must live in. And once he realizes he can control what people feel, he begins testing what else he can take. Chapter Act Ibu, the Imperial Brothel. This next act is so disturbing that historians still argue over whether it truly happened or whether later writers exaggerated it. But this is what the ancient sources claim. Caligula established a brothel inside the imperial palace itself, not for his own pleasure, but as a public business. And the people he placed inside it were not common prostitutes. They were the sons and daughters of Rome's noble families, the aristocracy, the daughters of senators, the children of the men who governed provinces and commanded legions. Heralds were sent into the streets to announce prices, different rates for married women versus unmarried, and special fees for virgins of senatorial bloodlines. And then comes the detail that freezes the blood, the detail that shows this wasn't impulsive cruelty, but systematic humiliation. Caligula allegedly kept ledgers, names, dates, transactions, a bureaucratic record of degradation, written in ink, preserved like government accounts. Not lust, not passion, not chaos. Administration. A government office of humiliation. Think about what this does to the human mind. If you're a Roman nobleman, your entire identity, your worth, is built on family honor. Your ancestors stretch back centuries. Your name carries weight, carries history, carries expectations. And now, your daughter is being announced in the streets like livestock for sale. And somewhere in the palace, there is a ledger with her name written inside it. And you can do nothing. Not protest, not plead, not even whisper a complaint. Because the alternative is execution. Caligula isn't just taking bodies. He is taking the one thing Rome's elite valued more than breath itself: their reputation, their lineage, their name. But he doesn't stop here. He realizes something far more potent: public humiliation wounds. But private humiliation, committed in front of public witnesses, destroys. Pourquoi? Act 3, the banquet of predation. Picture the scene again, but now with all the context you've gathered. You're at an imperial banquet. Your wife sits beside you. 50, maybe 100 senators fill the room, their wives beside them. Everyone drinks wine that tastes faintly of fear. Caligula rises. Silence falls instantly. He begins to move between the tables, slowly, methodically, his eyes scanning the women with a cold, clinical detachment. He is choosing. He stops at your table. He looks at your wife, not the way a man looks at a woman, but the way a buyer inspects an animal he's considering purchasing. He studies her teeth, her hair, the proportions of her body. He does not ask permission. He does not acknowledge you exist. He simply takes her hand and leads her away. You sit there. The man beside you stares into his wine, wishing he could sink into it. Everyone pretends not to notice, because everyone knows that if you stand, if you speak, if even a flicker of emotion crosses your face, you will not leave this room alive. She will not leave this room alive, and neither will your children. So you sit, you drink, you wait. 20 minutes, then 30. Time stretches thin, like something about to tear. Around you, conversations flicker weakly, forced, brittle, empty. Someone attempts a joke, and it falls dead in the air before it ever reaches the table. At last, he returns. Your wife sits down beside you. She won't look at you. Her hands rest in her lap as if they belong to someone else. And then, he sits too. He doesn't walk away. He doesn't release you from this moment. He stays, settling in as if nothing unusual has happened. Then in front of everyone, your friends, your colleagues, your rivals, he begins to speak. Not vaguely, not suggestively, but in detail, Cold, clinical, explicit detail. He evaluates her, comments on her performance, compares her to the wives of other senators, makes jokes that scrape across your skin, and you must smile. You must laugh at the jokes. You must nod, pretending this is normal, pretending this is fine. Because this is not just about your wife, this is about you. Caligula is dismantling everything that defines a Roman man. Your duty to protect your household, your authority, your dignity, your very place in the social order. He is stripping it from you in front of every pair of eyes that matter. And tomorrow, you must return. You must greet the same men, the same women, all of whom know exactly what happened, and you must pretend they do not know. This is the genius of the machine. He isn't simply destroying individuals. He's corroding the social fabric itself, turning everyone into witnesses, everyone into accomplices, everyone into participants in each other's humiliation. And we are only at Act 3. What comes next is so horrific, so intentional, so structurally designed to break the human psyche that modern psychologists still study it as a blueprint for systematic psychological torture. Because Caligula understands something terrible. There is one bond even stronger than marriage, the bond between parent and child, and this becomes the fourth act of his machine, the grieving father. What comes next is almost unbearable to describe. If you need a moment, I understand. Caligula begins ordering executions not for treason, not for rebellion, not for crimes, but because he is irritated, bored, or simply curious about the consequences. And with these executions, he creates a new protocol. When a man's son is put to death, the father must watch. Not from afar, not hidden, but up close, front row, forced to witness every final breath. But what transforms this from cruelty into something far darker is what happens afterward. The historian Suetonius records an incident that reveals the true horror. A father watches his son die, helpless, silent, broken. Immediately afterward, Caligula has the man brought to the imperial palace for dinner. That night, while the boy's body is still warm, the father sits at Caligula's table. Food before him, torches lit around him, guests murmuring in the background. And Caligula just watches him, not speaking, not comforting, simply observing, as if the man's face were an experiment in progress. He studies the father's every twitch, every breath, waiting to see if grief will surface. A single tear, a quiver of the lip, any sign of humanity. Because if the man shows emotion, any emotion at all, Caligula will know he has not broken him completely, that there is still something left to destroy. So the father sits there, chewing food he cannot taste, answering questions he doesn't hear, while his son's body cools somewhere in the dark streets outside, and the man who ordered his death analyzes his sorrow for entertainment. Caligula isn't just taking a child, he's taking something far more sacred, the right to grieve. He is twisting the deepest human bond, the bond between parent and child, into a source of terror instead of comfort. Because now, if you love someone, that love becomes a weapon that can be used against you. The more you care, the more exposed you are, the more he can hurt you. Under Caligula, even love becomes dangerous. And then comes the part no one expected. The machine had a flaw, a fatal one, because while Caligula was busy breaking senators and noblemen, men trained to endure humiliation, men who understood politics, men who could convince themselves that survival was worth any price. He made one catastrophic miscalculation. He casually directed his daily cruelty at the wrong kind of person, a soldier. Act 5, the wrong man. His name was Cassius Chaerea, a senior officer of the Praetorian Guard, the emperor's personal protectors. These were not politicians. They were not fragile aristocrats. They were elite soldiers, men who stood only inches from Caligula every day, armed, disciplined, built for violence. Chaerea had one trait Caligula found endlessly amusing, a high-pitched voice. And true to form, Caligula couldn't let it go. Day after day, he mocked him. New jokes, new taunts, new ways to make the other soldiers smirk at Chaerea's expense. But the detail that truly reveals how careless, how casual Caligula's cruelty had become is this. When it was Chaerea's turn to request the daily military password, a formal protocol performed in front of the entire guard, Caligula would give him passwords like Venus, Priapus, names of gods tied to femininity or exaggerated sexuality, chosen specifically to belittle him in front of the men he commanded. To Caligula, it was nothing, a momentary amusement he'd forget by the next hour. But to a soldier like Chaerea, a man trained for action, a man who carried a blade within arm's reach of the emperor, each insult was a drop of poison, a slow accumulation, a quiet decision taking shape. These passwords were chosen on purpose. Deliberately effeminate or overtly sexual words meant to make the other soldiers smirk, day after day, week after week. For Caligula, it was nothing. A tiny joke, a momentary amusement he would forget before sunset. But for Chaerea, each insult was a drop of poison, because here is where Caligula made a fatal miscalculation. Senators could be humiliated. They wanted to live. They had children, estates, legacies, things worth protecting. They could justify their suffering as the cost of survival. But Chaerea was not a senator. He was a soldier, a man trained to solve problems with a blade, a man who stood beside the emperor every single day, a sword always at his hip. And Caligula had just taught this soldier that life under him was not worth living. Caligula had grown so confident in his machine, so certain that fear would always keep him safe, that he forgot the oldest rule of predators: never corner something that can kill you. What happened next took less than 60 seconds, but it altered the course of Roman history, and the aftermath would reveal something even darker than anything Caligula did while he was alive. The Killing Corridor, January 24th, 41. AD Caligula is attending a performance. He's in a cheerful mood, having spent the morning arranging games and spectacles. A play is scheduled for later that afternoon. Around midday, he chooses to leave through a narrow underground passage, a dim corridor connecting the theater to the palace. Rough stone walls press close on both sides. The air is cold, tight, claustrophobic. He walks in, surrounded by only a few attendants, and in the shadows ahead, the conspirators wait. Chaerea steps forward as Caligula approaches. Nothing unusual yet. Praetorian officers routinely check in with the emperor. He asks for the day's password. Caligula, utterly unaware, wrapped in the certainty of his own invincibility, responds with one last sneering, mocking remark. It is the final thing he ever says. Chaerea shouts, "Take this!" and drives his sword upward beneath Caligula's ribs. Caligula staggers backward, tries to flee, but the corridor offers no escape. A narrow stone tunnel with conspirators closing in from both ends. They descend on him. According to the ancient sources, he is struck nearly 30 times. Blow after blow, 4 years of rage, humiliation, and terror unleashed in less than a minute. And then, the monster is gone. The machine stops. But this is the moment when everything becomes worse. The conspirators do not stop with Caligula. They find his wife, Caesonia. She knows what has happened. She has heard the screams. She begs, pleads, tries to reason with men who have just slain an emperor. But they silence her too. Then they search for the nursery, Caligula's little daughter. Julia Drusilla, barely 2 or 3 years old, sources differ, is found crying for her mother. A soldier lifts her into his arms. He hesitates only long enough to remember why they came. They cannot allow an heir to survive, not even a child, not even an innocent. A single brutal act ends her life, because in their minds it is the only way to ensure no one will grow up seeking vengeance. And so the violence that was meant to end a tyrant devours his entire family, including a toddler who never understood the world she was born into. This is what happens when the machine breaks. It doesn't simply stop. It consumes everything still tethered to it. For a few hours, maybe an afternoon, it almost feels as though Rome might truly change. The Senate gathers in panic and possibility. Voices rise. Debates spill into the open. Some argue to restore the old republic, to end the line of emperors entirely, to return to a world where no single man holds absolute power. For the first time in generations, there is a genuine conversation about what Rome should be. But while the senators debate ideals, the Praetorian Guard makes a far simpler calculation. While the Senate talks, the guard loots the palace, moving room to room, taking jewelry, coins, anything worth carrying. And then one of them hears a noise behind a curtain. He pulls it back and finds a man crouching there, trembling, middle-aged, speaking with a stutter, walking with a limp. Claudius. Caligula's uncle, the family embarrassment, a man long dismissed as harmless, possibly damaged by childhood illness. But the guard doesn't see a harmless fool. He sees an opportunity. He sees a new emperor. They lift Claudius onto their shoulders and carry him to their camp. Before the Senate even realizes what has happened, the Praetorians proclaim him emperor. And while the Senate is still arguing about the fate of the Republic, the army has already made the decision. The system survives. Here is what lingers, what refuses to leave your mind after hearing this story. Caligula ruled for less than 4 years. 4. In the full span of Roman history, that is nothing. A brief disturbance, a footnote, and yet 2,000 years later, we are still speaking his name. Why? Because Caligula proved something terrifying about power, something that echoes across every century that followed. That a system built to obey one man can be twisted into a weapon more enduring than the man himself. He showed that an entire state, its laws, its armies, its treasury, its bureaucracy, can be transformed into instruments of personal, psychological warfare. He didn't operate outside the system. He made the system his weapon. The ledgers in the imperial brothel, that was bureaucracy doing its job. The forced mourning for Drusilla, that was law enforcement doing its job. The banquets where he violated the wives of senators, that was imperial hospitality doing its job. Every atrocity he committed was, in the eyes of the empire, legal, because he was the law. And when he died, the system didn't crumble. It simply waited and then accepted a new operator. That is the real horror, not that one man was a monster, but that the machine he built kept moving long after he was gone. Look at what followed. Nero, burning Rome and blaming the Christians. Domitian, executing people for their expressions, for the way they looked at him. Commodus, forcing senators to watch him fight as a gladiator. Elagabalus, committing acts so disturbing they cannot be repeated on this platform. The blueprint remained intact. The machine kept evolving because Caligula exposed a truth Rome could never unlearn. When one person controls everything, the military, the law, the treasury, the culture, there is nothing to stop them. No checks, no balances. Only the hope that they die or that someone kills them. And even then, the system simply chooses someone new. Suetonius wrote that Caligula was the best of servants and the worst of masters. He learned tyranny by first pretending to be the perfect subject. He studied under Tiberius, watched silently as a monster worked, learned every technique, every method, every psychological tool, and then he perfected them. That is the warning. That is the lesson carved into the dark margins of Roman history. The greatest dangers do not arrive roaring. They learn. They adapt. They wait. They wear the mask of loyalty until the mask is no longer needed. And there is one more shadow in this story. After Claudius became emperor, he ordered most of Caligula's records destroyed. The ledgers, the correspondence, the documents, burned. What remains today comes from men like Suetonius and Tacitus, writing decades later, piecing together memories, rumors, and whatever fragments survived the flames. Which means that everything I've told you, the 5 acts, the structure of the machine, the systematic terror, is only what escaped the purge. Imagine what we lost. Imagine what was so disturbing that even an empire that crucified thousands and threw people to lions decided it was better erased, never to be read again. Caligula ruled for 3 years, 9 months, and 8 days. In that brief span, he built a machine that taught every future tyrant exactly how to break human beings, methodically, psychologically, completely. And the blueprint never vanished. It's still out there. Which leaves us with one final question. If a machine like that could be built once, who's to say it can't be built again? Because the blueprint didn't die with Caligula. It never does. It simply waits for a moment of weakness, for an ambitious enough man, for a system willing to obey. History remembers Caligula not just because he was cruel, but because he proved how frighteningly easy it is for a single person to bend an entire civilization to the shape of their darkest impulses. Every empire has its pressures, its cracks, its hidden corridors where fear can grow. So as we close this chapter, as the torchlight fades on this story, I'll leave you with something to think about. Power rarely corrupts all at once. It corrupts quietly, in the same silence where Caligula learned to smile and obey. And sometimes, by the time we finally recognize the monster, it's already wearing the crown. If you'd like to keep exploring the darker corners of history, slowly, softly, without looking away, consider liking this video and subscribing. Sleep well, and I'll see you in the next story.